In American culture, a college degree is a badge of honor, a sort of educational litmus test that shows not only your ability to withstand the rigors of higher education, but also your willingness to pay for it. Big time.
If you look at the first 25 intro courses in college, it adds up to around a $50 billion market.
College has become wildly expensive for most families, and yet college is one instance, maybe the only one, when banks will consider a teenager with no credit history, no guaranteed income, and a loan that can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Basically, there are 1 million people who take Calculus 1 in the United States alone, and they spend on average about $2,500 per person. So that means that Calculus 1 is a $2.5 billion a year industry. And 40% of those students fail, so we're wasting $1 billion on essentially bad calculus teaching.
That's Aaron Rasmussen.
I'm a serial entrepreneur in robotics and CPG and in education. I was a co-founder of Masterclass, and I'm now CEO and founder of Outlier.org.
He set out to revolutionize higher education, and his plan starts with a touch of curiosity. I'm Doug Fraser, and this is What We Do, where we'll meet the people behind the most intriguing passions, hobbies, and jobs around the world.
Would you consider yourself curious?
Absolutely. Like, with all the dangers that come to cats, I am curious.
One thing Aaron's been curious about since childhood? Video games.
I had a very clever mother. So when I was 4, all I wanted to do was play video games. And she said, well, if you use a computer as a tool, you can play it with video games for an equal amount of time. And I was like, what do you mean? She goes, well, learn to touch type.
Over the next year, Aaron and his mom had a trade agreement. If he did a half hour of typing lessons, he could play a half hour of video games. By the time he was 5, he could touch type.
And then I was like, okay, what next? And she goes, well, make your own video games, and just gave me a book on Smart Basic.
For Aaron, video games offered an escape and also a playground for his curious mind. After all, curiosity drives us to learn new things and get better at the things we're already familiar with. It's the mind driving past the edge of the map to explore the unknown. Curiosity brought us out of the caves and into city streets. It was the guiding light for electricity, the steady hand behind the Sistine Chapel, the head doctor of cancer research. When we hit a seemingly insurmountable wall, curiosity is that voice in our heads that nudges us toward the answer by whispering, "What if?" Or, in the case of college intro courses, that voice might ask, why should I even learn psychology?
It's a great question. Please justify to me why I should be curious about this, because if you're not curious about something, it's very much a chore. And if we can communicate the idea that learning this thing is fun to a student, it's a really fundamentally different style of education. You know when you have a professor that's just really excited to tell you about their work, even if you're maybe not 100% on board with the topic that they're into, it sort of wraps you up in it.
What is the psychology behind people that carve the world up into us and them?
What do we mean by normality and abnormality?
There are ways to raise our levels of happiness.
Are smartphones destroying a generation? And by the way, that generation is you.
Lie detectors. They're more likely to label an innocent person guilty than a guilty person innocent.
Where does your conception of good and evil come from?
We are the product of our genes and our environment, neither of which we got to choose.
We have bonus chapters. It's a weird concept. I remember an administrator telling me once in college that college is the only service where the customer is happy when you fail to provide it. I was like, what? And he goes, every time we have a snow day, you guys are all excited. Isn't that a terrible sign? And I was like, oh, it might be. So the idea that we'd include bonus chapters in psychology is pretty unusual. But it's this implication that these topics are so fun. You want to have more content, not less. So our bonus chapters, for example, are Sasha Reed talking about the psychology of serial killers. It is super fascinating. You know what I mean? I want to hear about that. It's Paul Bloom talking about moral psychology. These are not topics you'd ordinarily find in Introduction to Psychology. Now, we are very comprehensive in covering what's important to the core curriculum of psychology, but approaching it with that gusto and hopefully infecting the students with it as well, I think is really important, because then they can take what they've learned and go much further.
From Intro to Calculus to Intro to Psychology, the courses Aaron and his team are putting together have one thing in common: story. It's this understanding of the important connection between story and students that sets Aaron's style of education apart. He's not just setting a camera in a classroom and hitting record. He's producing Hollywood-quality videos with world-renowned experts starring in the lead roles. He's excavating the minds of cornerstone classes in search of gems that have been lost to generations of template teaching and PowerPoint lectures. It's this story-first approach that led him to co-creating Masterclass back in 2014. If you're not familiar, here's a short list of Masterclass instructors: Neil deGrasse Tyson, David Sedaris, Ron Howard, Ken Burns, Shonda Rhimes, Bob Woodward, Penn and Teller, Hans Zimmer, Natalie Portman, Neil Gaiman, R.L. Stein, Spike Lee.
I'm Christina Aguilera.
I'm Serena Williams.
I'm Martin Scorsese.
This.
And this.
And this is my masterclass.
Do you remember the first story you ever told?
I did a lot of make-believe as a kid. And it was always these stories about this like team of adventurers that would be exploring like a far off planet. And they would always there's always like ship malfunctions and, alien species they had to fight. And they would have to sort of work together to solve these things. But when I thought about what the first story I told was, a couple things pop into mind. One of them is organizing the neighborhood kids into doing a production of Cinderella with my sister.
Aaron and his neighborhood friends were so serious about the production, they begged their parents to get them dry ice.
And in our head, there would be this plume of dry ice vapor, and the fairy godmother would appear.
Or at least that's how they imagined it would play out.
And it was too windy. So it's just a cup, like one of those 80s plastic cups with just dry ice sort of blowing off of it. That was one story that was fun for us to tell because we had to write it as a script. It was 10 pages long, which I remember just felt like the longest thing we'd ever written.
But daring too. Oh, just leave it to me. What a gown this will be.
It was a major milestone in Aaron's storytelling. At 6 years old, not only did he and his friends come up with a story and write a script, they actually went through with it, flaws and all. That gumption would help him create the story for a popular video game he'd later create based on an accident in high school chemistry.
I remember turning to my friend Brander and saying, "Hey, can you grab me a periodic table? Because I think there's 7 electrons in the p shell of one of these and 1 in the other, so I think this is really unstable." And he went to go find a periodic table. And I was like, well, it's the teacher giving it to me. What could be the problem with that? And I grew up in the middle of the woods, and we didn't wear goggles in chemistry class. Literally no one was wearing goggles.
The explosion burnt a third of his face and head. His corneas were scorched black. In an instant, the world went dark. Aaron's vision was gone.
$43 million borrowers have about $1.5 trillion in federal student loan debt.
As Aaron pointed out earlier, college intro classes are a cash cow. Since the dawn of the internet, an innovation has yet to surface that makes these intro classes more affordable, which makes them more accessible.
I think it's pretty bizarre that that's not something that exists where you can get college credits for it.
So he helped create one.
We have 2 main missions at Outlier, which is increase access to high quality education and reduce student debt. The nice thing about Outlier is we're trying to just update the system. I found a lot of value in my degree. I found a lot of value in being in a residential college, but I wouldn't suggest that to somebody, at the prices that we're seeing across the majority of colleges. So we want to make sure that we're there so that any student who wants to learn something can do that.
If students took intro classes through places like Outlier, They could save, are you ready for it? $40 billion a year.
That's an incredible impact to be able to take a swing at. What's always fascinating to me is what sparks curiosity in different people. Like, some people are just extraordinarily curious about history and they want to know everything. You know, when you look at something and you want to ask why and you want to ask how. Whereas, for me, it's very hard for me sometimes to see like a machine and not understand how it works. Or if I see a camera move, to not understand the mechanics behind it and how to replicate it. And it gives us a sense of priority in many ways, because the thing you're sort of most curious about will eclipse the other things that you could be curious about. And I think about that in education a lot, is how do you spark curiosity in someone?
Had Aaron listened to his own curiosity, it might have saved him in his high school chemistry classroom. The doctors told him he'd probably never see again. But something incredible happened. Over time, the darkness released its grip, and the world started coming back into view. Aaron's sight had returned.
I was pretty traumatized from it, so I ended up not going into chemistry because I couldn't set foot in a chemistry lab for a long time. As I got over that, I decided that I wanted to write a video game about it. So I'd sort of written this sort of halfway script and kind of didn't think about it for a couple of years, and then was talking to my buddy Mike, who's getting his master's in game design. He's like, "What? That's awesome. Send me what you got." And I'm like, it's really not in a spot. He's like, "Come on, just send it over." So I sent it to him, and 24 hours later, he sent me a demo of the first level. I could play it, and I was like, this works. This is a video game with no graphics. And the goal was really to communicate the experience of being blind. Now, granted, doing it within the context of a fun science fiction story.
His game, Blindside, is an audio-only adventure where you and the rest of humanity has gone blind. Your city's been destroyed and mysterious creatures roam the world, making meals of the living.
You have to navigate the whole thing without being able to see it. And we were really serious about making a video game that was the exact same experience for sighted gamers as it was for the visually impaired. So we didn't provide any maps or anything.
The game went on to win awards, and his friend Mike, who helped him create Blindside, became his first employee and head of product at Outlier. Aaron's fascination with science fiction makes a lot of sense. After all, science fiction is the offspring of curiosity, storytelling, and limitless possibility.
You get these really smart people spending extraordinary amounts of time thinking about a universe of their own creation. And for a second, you get to borrow somebody else's perspective on that limitless possibility. Science fiction directly has driven innovation in our present day. Arthur C. Clarke creating geosynchronous satellite orbits. Like, that's how all of our communications satellites work now. And that's literally from Arthur C. Clarke. Now, he was also a scientist, but then you've got Heinlein, with waterbeds, for example, or H.G. Wells with automatic doors. These concepts that are these interesting people sort of projecting forward about kind of a cooler future, yet to be drawn into the real world.
The real world, where college intro courses continue to have a bad rap. It's unfortunate, because the brilliant minds who took lifetimes to grasp these ideas and share them with the world, their findings are often being treated as throwaway obligations, a semester's worth of busy work, rather than the incredible and fascinating insights they are. But colleges tend to not be in the business of education, but rather in the education business. Their very nature suggests a wholesale, humdrum approach to introductory courses. If we can go beyond the business model and dig into the why behind a classroom, there's much to be discovered. Why is an expert standing in the front of a room full of non-experts? The goal isn't to simply transfer knowledge. It's to provide students with lectures that set their curiosity ablaze, to be storytellers, to be the patient zero of knowledge and spread it with conviction. And above all, to make education accessible to anyone who wants it.
It is too expensive at this point to go to school and have the freedom you need to choose the major you want and to choose the career you want coming out of college. So if we can just cut the cost of college down by, call it half, I think that's a huge impact.
For most students, how to pay for school is a major consideration. The average household with student debt owes more than $47,000.
We're starting to see how student debt is driving income inequality, racial inequality, because we're creating the haves and the have-nots in American society, and that is being filled out by those who are forced to take on student debt.
It's not only fundamentally broken, it's definitely broken to its core.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. Would you mind leaving a rating and review for the show? It only takes a moment and it's a huge help. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. Until next time, stay curious. What We Do is produced by me, Doug Frazier, for WHRO Public Media.